Let's start with the topic for today, which is loving God. Okay, I'll just forget. Okay, let's start with a quote from Matthew. Jesus was approached by the Pharisees, and he was asked to tell them what was the greatest of all the Judaic laws. And Jesus' response was to quote Deuteronomy and tell them, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So I think in this case, all is the big word. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. So if we point to our heart, where is your heart? Here. If you point to your mind, where's your mind? And where's your soul? Point to your soul. So this thing about soul, it's interpreted in our culture in many different ways, like soul food. Yeah.
Greens.
What makes soul food soul food?
It's good.
It's good. I've also been told it's the love you put into it that makes it soul food. What about soul music?
Earth, Wind, and Fire. Yeah.
Soul music. Doesn't it make you just, if you were to all stand up and I was to play a soul music song right now, would anyone be able to stand still? No. It'll just move you from the inside out and transfer to your body. So, I think fundamentally, when we think about this commandment, and Jesus is saying this is the most important commandment. He's not saying forget all the other ones. He's saying this is what all of them hang on. If we can't get this one right, nothing else really matters. We can go through the motions of being religious people and attending synagogues, mosques, churches, and what have you. But if we can't love God, then none of that really matters. This is what Jesus is saying. So, how do we perceive God? What is our perception of God? Let's start from there. Some of us perceive God with a sense of fear. In fact, in the Old Testament, there was a lot of evidence that that was the relationship people had with God. People were afraid of God, and this is what kept their behavior in check for the most part. Some people approach God with a sense of reverence, and that's fine too. But does that mean you are loving God when you revere God? Does that mean you are loving God when you fear God? Some people approach God with a sense of neediness. In fact, if you look at our prayers, most of our prayers are needy prayers. Please pray for such and such a person. They need help. Please pray for me right now because I need help. Please pray for so-and-so because they need help. Nothing wrong with that. But does that mean you love God? Are you loving God when you admit your need for God in your life? And some of us have certain gifts that we like to share, and we like to do, and we like to act, and we like to, give sermons or what have you. And if we do those things, yes, they're helpful, but are they an act of love? So the question is, how do we perceive God? And are we loving God? In this sense, if you've played poker, you know the expression all in. What does all in mean? It means you are literally putting all your money on the table. And there's no backing down from there. It can end well, or it could end badly. But either way, you're all in. And I think the point that Jesus is making here is that in our life, we have to be all in. We can't just be cerebral connoisseurs of religion. We can't just be looking at the Bible or the religious texts and thinking, that's a very interesting idea. Yes, let me think about that. What Jesus is saying is you have to be all in. All your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. When we look at the book of Solomon, King David's, what did King David write? He wrote the Psalms, right? Yeah, okay. So when we look at the Psalms in the Old Testament are like a journal where David is really searching his soul and putting down in poetry form his thoughts about his situation. And some of them are very beautifully written. We had one last week where it was a quote from one of the Psalms. As a deer panteth for the water, so my soul thirsts for God. So he's talking about his soul thirsting. Do you have that in your life? Do you thirst for God? What does that mean? When we think about those kind of expressions of love, and then we compare them with our own sense of where we're at in our relationship with God, do we have this thirsting where we are seeking God with our very being? Do we love? If someone were to come to your house, a lawyer for instance, or a police detective, and say, okay, I'm here to investigate you, and I won't say any names, including my own. Okay, I'm here to investigate you, Mr. Chisholm, and I'm going to find, or I'm looking for any evidence that you love God. I'm going to be searching through everything. All the relationships you've had with different people, the relationships you have with your family members now. We're going to be searching through all your internet searches. We're going to be looking at the books on your library and your shelf. We're going to look at everything. And we're going to see whether we can find any evidence that you love God. If that were the case, what would they find? Would they find any evidence? And if they don't find any evidence, then isn't that a cause for concern? Here we are trying to reconnect ourselves with God. And yet, there's no evidence, or very little evidence, or not much evidence that we are actually reciprocating God's love. So, this is something to be thinking about. Now, here we are. We're resultant beings. We came into this world. We are born and we exist. And here we are understanding, at least intellectually, that God is loving us, that we are loved. We hear this over and over and over again. Do we believe it? Yes? No? Maybe?
Yes.
Do we believe in God? Do we believe God's loving us? Okay. So, it is possible. Some of you might not feel God's love. this is possible. And it is happening at different times of the day. You wake up in the morning, are you feeling God's love? When somebody does something nice for you, you may feel God's love at that moment. You may feel God's love when you read something, or you see something, or you experience something from another human being. If we don't reciprocate in those moments, then what happens to that feeling? On Easter, our family took a trip down to the Bay Area, and on the way back we visited my wife's cousin. And he always invites us every year to his house. He organizes an Easter egg hunt for the kids. You know, this has been going on for years. So now the kids are older, but still he does it, and it's kind of fun, and we all enjoy ourselves. He always buys gifts for everyone. You know, t-shirt or cap or something, even for the adults. And we always appreciate that, and we always have a good time, and then we drive back. And that's how we spend our Easter weekend. Almost every year, I have a desire to write a thank you email or a thank you card. And I don't. And the desire is there. And for some reason, I can't explain it. Life catches up and you get busy, and then a few days go by and you're like, oh, I should do it now. And then things happen and this happens, and then a few more days go by, and then before you know it, a few weeks go by, and it's like, well, this seems kind of lame now. It's like we're 1 month on. Writing a little email now doesn't seem right. I'll have to make something bigger out of it. Oh, but and then eventually you just don't do it. So this is the thing about the love of God. Do you think, do you feel, do you realize that God is loving you? And if you do, then you probably are already responding, and you are in a reciprocal relationship with God. But maybe you're like me, 1 month on from that event, or 2 months on now, and you've kind of forgotten the love that you received, and you feel indifferent about that experience. It's in the past. You can't really remember it. You're not thinking about it every day. You're not really conscious of it. And because you did not reciprocate when you experienced love, you did not express your gratitude for that experience, now that relationship is dead, or it's on hold, or it's paralyzed, or it's in status. It's not going anywhere. So my suggestion for all of us, including those of us who experience God's love, we can amp it up a bit. For those of us who are not experiencing God's love, those are the people that I feel that I'm speaking to more right now, because many days I really don't feel God's love. And it's not God's fault. It's my fault. Because I'm not engaging in a response to those moments where God's love manages to break through the clouds, hit me, and I go, oh yeah, I feel good. And then a few minutes later, or a few hours later, the clouds cover the sun again, and then, and I forget. What I think is so important is for us to get a piece of paper and write down things that I'm grateful for. Because I think the sense of remembering the blessings in our life can help us to acknowledge that God is loving us. And if we can acknowledge God's love, and we can respond, we can write a letter in response to God through prayer, through meditation, through whatever response mechanism you feel you have, then we can open up the relationship again. And by opening up the relationship, by responding, guess what happens? If I had responded to my wife's cousin, on his end, he probably would have sent something back saying, "Oh, you're welcome, it was great to see you." And we would have had an ongoing back and forth that probably could have extended for the next year. But now, that chain of communication has been shut down by me. I can reopen it any time if I choose. Likewise, in your relationship with God, God is the source of love. God is the source of energy. God is the source of all these things. God is the source. But we have a responsibility to respond. And we have the ability. It's called response ability. But we also have choice. What do you call a child that you're loving and loving and loving and loving and loving and doesn't respond? Yes. And what are we? What must we be or feel like to God, who's loving us, loving us, loving us, loving us, loving you? We must feel like spoiled brats to God. You know, like, come on, don't you see what I'm doing for you? Look at this, look at this. Look at this. Take a trip to the ocean. Experience my love for you. Go to the forest. Go to the mountain. Go into nature. That is a clear expression of my love for you. Okay? Take yourself out of this urban jungle that we've created and go back into nature. There. That's the stuff that I made. I didn't make those ugly buildings. I made this stuff, And I tell you, it really works. Getting out of the van the other day when we went down to the Bay Area, we went down to this beach. I just took off my shoes and walked on the sand in my bare feet. I can't explain this. It was just amazing. It just felt so good. I was so appreciative of being in that moment, being in that situation, and experiencing the love of nature on me. Just the sensation of being in that circumstance. So God is all around. God is loving you. We, unfortunately, have blocked ourselves from God. This is through the fall. Okay, that's the event, the beginning of human history. That's one of the problems, okay? Yes, God is aware of that. God has been reaching us through Scripture and people, and God is still reaching us, trying to get through the clouds. We need to do some work here. We have to respond in order to engage and develop and kickstart that relationship again. We can't put it all on God to do more. If God is already giving 100% to us, we can't expect more. But what we can do is respond and kickstart that relationship. And it's like a spluttering car. They're going, eventually we can have a full-blown relationship with our Creator. But we need to respond. So don't delay your thank you cards when you get them from whoever. Respond and enjoy that relationship of love. Similarly with your Creator, our God, please respond. And if you're having a hard time experiencing God's love right now, then go into nature. Go put your foot in the Sacramento River this afternoon. Do whatever it takes to kickstart your sense of gratitude for being alive, for being here, for being, who you are. And engage in that relationship so that we can eventually get to the point where we're loving our God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our strength. Because that is the goal of human history. That is the goal of each and every single one of us, to have that kind of relationship. Because nothing else matters. If you're doing that, you don't need any other laws to live by, because you'll already be living by the most fundamental law of the universe. You don't need to be told, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, because you'll already be living within the code of universality. You know, respect for all people. Don't need to be told to respect people because you're loving God, and God is the parent of all mankind. So of course you're loving people because you're loving God. You know, all these other laws, and they're just there to protect each other from our selfishness. But if all of us are focusing on trying to accomplish this relationship in our life, everything else just falls away. It becomes irrelevant, unnecessary. So do something today. Because I know, like, at the end of a Sunday sermon, how long can you retain the message?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, any bids on 30, 35, 40. Okay, we have a winner on the back here. 45 seconds before you forget the message of the Sunday sermon.
Let's wrap it up.
Hey! So, try to remember one thing. Please respond to the love of God. If you can't do that because you're not experiencing it in the first place, please write down what you're grateful for. Please go into nature. Please do something to refresh your memory of what it was like when you first joined this movement, or what your heart was at when you were thirsting for God. Try to get back to the point where you are realizing who you are in relationship to your heavenly parent. And then you can really begin the quest, the journey back to God's heart. Please join me in prayer. Our Heavenly Parent, thank you so much for reaching out to each and every one of us. You love us so much. So much. And yet, because of our own personal situations, because of our own lack of understanding, we close ourselves off from you time and time again. And then we wonder why life is hard, life is miserable, life is dark. And yet, you are looking at us and really hoping that we will respond to the love that you have given us, so that we can engage in a loving relationship between parent and child. But we need to respond. Please help us to open up a chink in the armor around our hearts, so that we can let the light in, even just a small fraction. And then, from this point, we can start to open ourselves to you and realize in deeper and more glorious detail the magnificence of each and every one of us, so that we can then grow to become your true children, joyful and content, and at the same time creating a glow around us in this world, just by being God-given children. So help us to become those types of people. Help us to aspire to that vision that you had, that relationship that you had in mind when you created us. Please help us to come forth from our hearts and be one with you. We offer this prayer in the name of James and Katia Chisholm of a Blessed Central Family, and through Christ our Lord. Adieu and Amen. So please spend a few minutes to discuss